My mother told me to stay quiet at the family reunion because I'd embarrass everyone. My sister whispered that I always ruin everything. But when they called me up to speak about my late father, I froze. That's when my 16-year-old daughter took the microphone and said something that left the entire room speechless. "I'm Sarah Mitchell, and I've spent 42 years feeling like I was never quite good enough for my own family. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and immediately sense that everyone wishes you hadn't shown up? That was my entire childhood, and somehow it followed me into adulthood. Let me paint you a picture of my family dynamics because understanding these relationships is crucial to what happened that day. My mother, Patricia Hartwell, is 68 years old and a retired high school English teacher. She's the kind of woman who still wears pearls to the grocery store and judges everyone by their grammar and appearance. Image is everything to her. She raised my sister Rebecca and me with the constant reminder that what will people think was more important than how we actually felt. Rebecca is my younger sister by 3 years, but you'd never know it from how our mother treats us. Rebecca Hartwell Stone is 39, married to a successful lawyer named David, and works as a top-producing real estate agent in an upscale suburb outside Chicago. She has 2 perfect children, Mason and Sophia, who attend private school and play instruments and speak French. Rebecca is everything my mother wanted in a daughter. Polished, successful, married to the right kind of man, living in the right kind of neighborhood. Then there's me. Sarah Mitchell, the family disappointment. I work as a medical billing clerk at a small clinic, making just enough to cover rent and groceries. I married my high school boyfriend Jake when I was 22, had my daughter Emma when I was 26, and divorced when I was 37 after discovering Jake's affair with his secretary. Classic story, right? My mother never let me forget that I chose poorly and that smart women don't end up divorced and struggling. But here's the thing about my daughter Emma. She's 16 years old and already has more backbone than I've ever had. Emma Mitchell is a junior at Roosevelt High School, makes honor roll every semester, and has this incredible ability to see right through people's nonsense. She's got my father's eyes and his sense of justice, but she inherited a confidence that somehow skipped my generation entirely. My father, Robert Hartwell, passed away 6 months before this reunion. He was 70 years old and had been the only person in my family who ever made me feel like I mattered. Dad worked construction his whole life, had calloused hands and a gentle heart, and he never cared about the things that obsessed my mother. He'd call me every Sunday just to check in, and he always ended our conversations the same way. "Sarah, you're doing better than you think you are. Don't let anyone tell you different." Dad's death hit me harder than I expected, not just because I lost him, but because I lost my only ally in the family. Without him there to deflect my mother's criticism or to remind Rebecca to be kinder, I felt completely exposed. The family reunion was Patricia's idea, of course. She wanted to honor Dad's memory by having all the relatives gather at Riverside Park, the same place we'd held family reunions when Rebecca and I were kids. There would be about 30 people there, my mother's siblings, their kids, some cousins I barely knew, and family friends who'd known Dad for decades. I almost didn't go. I sat in my car outside our apartment for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to convince myself that Emma and I could just drive to the movies instead. But Emma looked at me with those serious eyes of hers and said, "Mom, Grandpa would want us there, and I want to hear people talk about him. Plus, you have just as much right to be there as anyone else." That's my Emma, 16 years old and already wiser than me. She has this way of cutting through my anxiety and self-doubt with simple truths that I somehow can't see on my own. She's been doing that since she was little, actually. When other kids would make fun of our small apartment or my old car, Emma would shrug and say, "At least our home feels like home." So we went to the reunion, and I had no idea that my daughter was about to change everything. To understand what happened at that reunion, you need to know how I became the family disappointment in the first place. It didn't happen overnight. It was a slow burn of small failures and missed expectations that built up over 20 years. Growing up, Rebecca and I were raised with very different expectations. She was the academic star, the one who got straight A's, went to Northwestern University on a partial scholarship, and landed her first real estate job right out of college. Me? I was the dreamer who wanted to study art but couldn't afford the tuition, So I went to community college for 2 years and then dropped out when I met Jake. My mother never forgave me for that decision. "Sarah," she'd say, "you had potential and you threw it away for a boy." She wasn't wrong, exactly. But she also never tried to understand that I was 20 years old and thought I was in love. Jake was charming, funny, and he made me feel like I was the most important person in the world. We got married in a small ceremony at the courthouse because we couldn't afford anything bigger. Patricia was mortified that her daughter didn't have a proper church wedding. When Emma was born 4 years later, I thought maybe things would change. I thought having a grandchild would soften my mother's edges. And for a while, it did. But even then, there were constant comparisons. When Rebecca had Mason 2 years later, suddenly every conversation became about how Rebecca managed to balance motherhood and her career, while I was just staying home with Emma. The divorce 5 years ago was the final nail in the coffin of my mother's approval. Jake's affair came to light when Emma was 11, old enough to understand that Daddy had hurt Mommy very badly. The divorce was messy and expensive, and I had to move Emma and myself into a small 2-bedroom apartment across town. I took the job at Dr. Martinez's clinic because it offered health insurance and flexible hours that worked around Emma's school schedule. My mother's reaction to the divorce was telling. Instead of offering support, she said, "Well, Sarah, this is what happens when you don't choose carefully." Rebecca would never let herself end up in this situation. Rebecca, meanwhile, sent a sympathy card and a gift basket, but never called to actually talk. It was like they both saw my divorce as proof that I'd always been the weaker sister. Dad was different. After the divorce, his Sunday phone calls became longer. He'd ask about Emma's grades, my work, how I was holding up financially. He never made me feel like a failure. When I'd apologize for not being able to visit as often because money was tight, he'd say, "Sarah, you're doing the hard work of raising that girl right. That matters more than fancy dinners or expensive gifts." But Dad's death 6 months ago changed everything. Suddenly, I lost the one person who made me feel like I belonged in my own family. The last conversation we had was 2 days before his heart attack. He called to tell me that Emma had sent him a photo from her school's honor roll ceremony. "You know what, Sarah?" he said. "That girl of yours has something special. She's got your heart and my stubborn streak. She sees right through people's nonsense, and she's not afraid to call it out. You raised her to be strong." I started crying on the phone, which I rarely did with Dad. "I just feel like I'm failing at everything, Dad. Mom and Rebecca have their lives figured out, and I'm still struggling to pay rent." "Listen to me," he said firmly. "Success isn't about how much money you make or what neighborhood you live in. It's about the kind of person you are when nobody's watching. Emma is kind, honest, and brave because of how you raised her. That's success, Sarah. Don't let anyone tell you different." Those were almost the last words he said to me. He died 2 days later at work. Sudden heart attack. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. Standing in that hospital waiting room with Emma, watching my mother and Rebecca make funeral arrangements without consulting me, I realized I'd lost more than my father. I'd lost my advocate, my translator, the person who helped me navigate family gatherings without feeling completely alone. So when Patricia announced this reunion to celebrate Dad's life, I knew it would be torture. But Emma looked at me with those wise eyes and said, "Mom, we're going. Grandpa loved you and he'd want you there. Besides, I want to meet the relatives I've only heard about." That's how we ended up driving to Riverside Park on a sunny Saturday morning. Me gripping the steering wheel and Emma chatting excitedly about finally meeting her extended family. I had no idea I was driving straight into the moment that would change everything. The moment Emma and I stepped out of my 10-year-old Honda Civic at Riverside Park, I knew this was a mistake. The parking area was filled with shiny SUVs and luxury sedans, and there was Rebecca's white BMW gleaming in the afternoon sun like a beacon of everything I wasn't. I smoothed down my Target dress, the nicest thing I owned, and tried to ignore the knot in my stomach. Emma squeezed my hand and whispered, "You look beautiful, Mom." But as we approached the pavilion where 30-some relatives had gathered, I felt like I was walking into a courtroom where I'd already been found guilty. The conversation stopped. Not all at once, but in that subtle way that tells you people were just talking about you. Aunt Linda gave me a tight smile and immediately turned back to her conversation. Cousin Mark nodded awkwardly and looked away. The message was clear. I was tolerated, not welcomed. Then my mother appeared, wearing a black dress that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Patricia Hartwell had always been elegant, but grief had sharpened her edges somehow. She looked me up and down with that expression I knew so well, the one that said I'd disappointed her before I'd even opened my mouth. "Oh, good. Sarah actually showed up," she announced loudly enough for half the pavilion to hear. "Emma, sweetheart, you look absolutely lovely. Come give Grandma a hug." She embraced Emma warmly, then looked back at me. "It's such a shame your mother couldn't dress up a bit more for your grandfather's memorial." I felt my face burn. Emma's grip on my hand tightened, and I could see the anger flash in her eyes, but I squeezed back, silently asking her to let it go. This was exactly what I'd expected, and I didn't want to make a scene before we'd even found seats. Rebecca materialized beside us like she'd been waiting for her cue. She was wearing a designer black suit that fit her perfectly, her hair styled in that effortless way that actually takes hours and costs a fortune. "Sarah, how are you holding up?" she said, pulling me into one of those fake hugs that's all performance. "I heard you're still working at that little medical office. That's nice." The pause before nice said everything. "And Emma, my goodness, you're getting so tall. You must be, what, 15 now?" 16, Emma said quietly, but I caught the edge in her voice. 16? Well, Mason is doing so well at St. Benedict's Prep. He's been accepted to their advanced placement program for next year. Sophia just started violin lessons with the same instructor who taught at Juilliard. Rebecca smiled that bright practice smile. "It's so important to give children every opportunity, don't you think?" The dig was subtle, but deadly. Everyone around us could do the math. Mason was 14, 2 years younger than Emma, but Rebecca was making sure everyone knew her son was in private school while mine was at public Roosevelt High. The afternoon continued like a slow torture. Every conversation somehow circled back to my failures. When I mentioned that Emma made honor roll, Aunt Carol said, "Oh, that's wonderful. Public schools have really lowered their standards these days, haven't they?" When someone asked about my work, Uncle Jim said, "Medical billing. Well, at least it's steady work. Not everyone can handle the pressure of real sales like Rebecca." But the worst part was watching Emma take it all in. She stayed close to me, her jaw getting tighter with each passive-aggressive comment. I could see her studying the family dynamics, watching how they treated me versus how they fawned over Rebecca and her children. My 16-year-old daughter was learning exactly where we stood in the family hierarchy, and it was breaking my heart. Then Uncle Tom, Dad's youngest brother and the unofficial family organizer, stood up and tapped his beer bottle with a fork. Everyone, gather around. We're going to share some memories of Robert. I know he'd want us to celebrate his life, not just mourn his passing." People began forming a circle around the picnic tables. My chest tightened. I hadn't prepared anything to say. In my anxiety about just surviving the day, I'd forgotten that I might actually have to speak about Dad in front of everyone. "I'd like Rebecca to start us off," Uncle Tom continued. "She always had such a special relationship with her father." Patricia nodded approvingly. Rebecca stepped forward gracefully, ready to perform, but then Uncle Tom's eyes found mine across the circle. And then Sarah, of course. The two girls should share their memories together. The knot in my stomach became a boulder. Rebecca's confident smile faltered slightly as she looked at me, and I saw something flicker in her eyes. Was it concern? Or was she already worried I'd somehow embarrass the family? That's when my mother leaned over to Rebecca and whispered something that made my sister nod solemnly. I couldn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. After 42 years of being Patricia Hartwell's daughter, I knew exactly what she was saying. Keep an eye on Sarah. "You know how she gets emotional." Rebecca cleared her throat and stepped closer to me. "Maybe I should go first, and then we'll see how much time we have left," she said gently, but her meaning was clear. She was giving me an out, assuming I couldn't handle it, but it was what she whispered next that shattered what little confidence I had left. Leaning in close enough that only I could hear, Rebecca said, "Try not to make this about your drama, okay? Dad's memorial shouldn't be ruined by you getting all weepy and making everyone uncomfortable. In that moment, 30 years of being the lesser daughter crashed down on me. I was 42 years old, and my little sister still saw me as the family liability, the one who couldn't be trusted not to cause a scene. I looked around the circle of faces, some curious, some pitying, some already impatient, and realized that every single person there expected me to fail. They were waiting for me to prove, once again, that I was the Mitchell who didn't quite measure up. That's when Emma stepped closer to me. She was studying the faces around us too, and I could see her making the same calculations I was. But where I saw judgment and inevitable failure, Emma saw something else entirely. She saw injustice. And my daughter has never been able to stand by and watch injustice happen. Rebecca stepped forward to share her memories first, and I have to admit, she was perfect. She spoke eloquently about Dad's work ethic, his love for gardening, how he taught her to change a tire when she got her first car. Her voice was steady, her words carefully chosen, and she managed to make everyone smile without a single tear or awkward pause. She was everything I wasn't, composed, articulate, and completely in control. When she finished, the family erupted in gentle applause. Patricia beamed with pride, nodding as if to say, "That's how it's done." Uncle Tom smiled warmly and said, "Beautiful, Rebecca. Just beautiful. Robert would be so proud." Then his eyes found mine across the circle. "Sarah, would you like to share something about your father?" The world seemed to slow down. 30 pairs of eyes turned toward me, and I felt like a deer caught in headlights. My mouth went dry, my palms started sweating. Every single memory I had of Dad seemed to evaporate from my brain. I stood up slowly, my legs feeling like they might give out beneath me. The walk to the center of the circle felt like walking to my execution. I could hear my mother's sharp intake of breath, could practically feel Rebecca's tension radiating from across the group. But the worst part was the silence. That expectant, uncomfortable silence where everyone was waiting to see if I would embarrass myself, and by extension, embarrass them. I reached the spot where Rebecca had stood so confidently just moments before, and Uncle Tom held out the microphone. My hand was shaking so badly, I almost dropped it. I cleared my throat and opened my mouth to speak. Nothing came out. I tried again. Still nothing. The silence stretched on, becoming more awkward by the second. I could see people shifting uncomfortably, exchanging glances. Someone coughed. A child whispered something to their parent and was quickly shushed. My mind was completely blank. Not just blank, it was filled with static, like a radio that couldn't find a station. All I could hear were the voices from earlier. "She always ruins everything. Try not to make this about your drama. She knows how she gets emotional." I looked out at the faces staring back at me, and instead of seeing my family, I saw a jury that had already decided I was guilty. Guilty of being the disappointment, the failure, the one who couldn't even manage to honor her own father's memory without falling apart. Patricia's face was a mask of barely controlled mortification. Rebecca looked like she was mentally preparing to jump in and save the day. Other relatives were staring at their hands, the ground, anywhere but at me. The microphone felt like it weighed 100 pounds in my hand. I opened my mouth one more time, and when no words came, I felt something inside me crumble completely. This was it. This was the moment they'd all remember. Not any of the good things I'd done. Not how hard I'd worked to raise Emma alone. Not how much I'd loved Dad. They'd remember the time Sarah couldn't even manage to say a few words about her own father. That's when I heard movement behind me. Footsteps. I turned slightly and saw Emma walking toward me with a determination I'd never seen before. Her face was set, her shoulders squared, and her eyes were blazing with something that looked almost like fury. "Emma, no," I whispered, but she was already beside me. She looked up at me with those wise 16-year-old eyes and said quietly, "Mom, give me the microphone." "Honey, you don't have to—" "Yes, I do." Her voice was calm, but absolutely certain. "Give me the microphone, Mom." I hesitated. This wasn't how things were done in our family. Children didn't speak at adult gatherings. Teenagers certainly didn't interrupt memorial services. Patricia would be horrified. Rebecca would probably never forgive us. But Emma held out her hand with such quiet confidence that I found myself passing her the microphone. She adjusted it to her height and looked out at the circle of family members with a composure that I envied. "I'm sorry," she said clearly, "but I need to say something first." The murmur that had started to ripple through the crowd died instantly. Patricia's mouth actually fell open. Rebecca took a step forward as if she might intervene, but something in Emma's posture stopped her. I stood frozen beside my daughter, terrified of what she might say, but also strangely proud. In 16 years, I'd never seen Emma back down from anything she believed was right, whether it was defending a classmate from bullies or calling out a teacher who played favorites. But this wasn't the school cafeteria or a classroom debate. This was our family, with all its complicated dynamics and unspoken rules. Emma looked at me once more, and I saw something in her expression that took my breath away. It wasn't just determination, it was protective love. The same fierce love I'd felt for her every day since she was born, reflected back at me. She turned back to face the family, took a deep breath, and began to speak. And in that moment, I realized that my daughter was about to do something I'd never been able to do in 42 years of life. She was about to stand up for me. Emma looked out at the circle of faces with a calm that I'd never seen in her before. She was only 16, but in that moment, she seemed older than half the adults staring back at her. The microphone didn't shake in her hands. Her voice didn't waver. She stood there like she owned the space, like she had every right to speak. "Hi, everyone. I'm Emma, Sarah's daughter, and I want to tell you about my grandfather through my mom's eyes." Patricia's face had gone completely pale. Rebecca looked like she wanted to disappear into the ground. But Emma kept going, her voice growing stronger with each word. "You see, Grandpa Robert taught my mom something that some of you seem to have forgotten. That family means lifting each other up, not tearing each other down." A murmur rippled through the crowd. I could see some relatives shifting uncomfortably, but Emma didn't flinch. She waited for the murmur to die down before continuing. "I've been watching all of you today. I've listened to your comments about my mom's clothes, her job, her car, her life choices, and I have to tell you something. Grandpa would be ashamed of how you've treated his daughter today." "Emma," Patricia started to interrupt, but Emma held up her hand. "No, Grandma. I'm talking now, and I think it's time someone told the truth around here." The boldness of it took my breath away. My 16-year-old daughter had just told my mother, the woman who terrified me, to be quiet. And somehow, it worked. Patricia closed her mouth and stepped back. "You want to judge my mom? Let me tell you what I see every day. After my dad cheated on her and left us, my mom worked 3 jobs to keep us in our home. 3 jobs. She cleaned offices at night after working at the clinic all day, and she took in bookkeeping for small businesses on weekends. She never missed a single one of my school events, even when she was so exhausted she could barely stand." I felt tears starting to burn behind my eyes. Emma was sharing things I'd never told anyone, things I'd tried to hide from the family because I was ashamed of how hard we'd struggled. "She drove me to soccer practice in that old Honda you all keep smirking at, and you know what? I was proud to be picked up in that car because it represented everything my mom sacrificed for me. When other kids made fun of our small apartment, my mom taught me that a home isn't about square footage. It's about love." Emma's voice caught slightly, but she steadied herself and kept going. "You want to talk about success? My mom taught me how to balance a checkbook when I was 12, not because she wanted to burden me, but because she wanted me to understand the value of money and hard work. She taught me how to cook because we couldn't afford takeout every night. She taught me how to do my own laundry and clean and be responsible because she was raising me to be independent." The silence was complete now. Even the children had stopped fidgeting. Grandpa used to call my mom every Sunday, and you know what he'd tell her? He'd say, "Sarah, you're raising Emma to be kind, hardworking, and genuine. That's worth more than any fancy degree or big house." And he was right. Emma turned to look directly at Rebecca, then at Patricia. "Aunt Rebecca, you have a beautiful house and successful career, and that's wonderful. But my mom has something you don't have. She raised me to see people for who they really are, not what they own. She taught me that real class isn't about designer clothes or private schools. It's about how you treat people when they're struggling." Rebecca's face had crumpled. She was crying openly now, and I could see the shame in her eyes. And Grandma Patricia, my mom has spent her whole life trying to earn your approval, trying to be good enough for a woman who taught her that love was conditional. But you know what Grandpa told me the last time I saw him? He said, "Emma, your mom is the strongest person I know. She survived being raised by someone who never learned how to show love without conditions." Patricia gasped audibly. Several relatives were crying now. My mom taught me to survive people who try to make you feel small, and I'm proud of her for that. She taught me that when someone shows you who they really are, you believe them. And today, all of you showed me exactly who you are. Emma paused, looking around the circle one more time. Grandpa would be disappointed in how you treated his daughter today. She came here to honor his memory, and you made her feel unwelcome in her own family. But I want you all to know something. She's the strongest, most loving person I know, and I'm proud to be her daughter. She turned and handed me back the microphone, her eyes bright with unshed tears, but her chin held high. "Your turn, Mom. Tell them about Grandpa. Tell them how he loved you exactly as you are." And for the first time in my life, I found my voice. For the first time in my entire life, I looked out at my family and didn't see judgment in their eyes. I saw something I'd never seen before: respect. Emma had given me something more precious than approval. She'd given me my voice back. I took the microphone from my daughter's steady hands, and for once the words came easily. Dad used to tell me that the measure of a person isn't how they handle success, but how they handle struggle. I began, my voice stronger than I'd expected. He'd say, "Sarah, you're not failing when you fall down. You're only failing if you stay down." I looked directly at my mother, then at Rebecca. Dad loved all of us, but he saw something in me that I'm only now beginning to see myself. He saw a woman who got knocked down and got back up, who made mistakes but learned from them, who raised a daughter to be braver than she ever was. The tears came then, but they weren't tears of shame or embarrassment. They were tears of relief, of finally speaking my truth after 4 decades of silence. Dad knew that Emma and I didn't have the biggest house or the fanciest cars, but he also knew we had something more important. We had each other's backs. And today, my daughter proved that everything he believed about our little family was true. When I finished speaking about Dad's Sunday phone calls, his proud moments watching Emma grow up, and his unwavering belief in me, something remarkable happened. Uncle Tom started clapping. Slowly, others joined in. But it wasn't polite, obligatory applause. It was genuine, emotional, and it went on for nearly a full minute. Then Rebecca stepped forward. My successful, perfect sister walked right up to me with tears streaming down her face. "Sarah, I owe you the biggest apology of my life," she said, her voice breaking. "I've been so focused on being the good daughter that I forgot how to be a good sister. Emma's right. Dad would be ashamed of me today." She pulled me into a real hug, not one of those performative family gathering embraces, but the kind of hug we used to share as kids before competition and comparison drove us apart. "I've been jealous of you for years," Rebecca whispered in my ear. "You have something I've never had. You raised a daughter who would fight for you. My kids respect me, but they don't love me the way Emma loves you. I've been so busy being successful that I forgot to be present." But the biggest shock came from my mother. Patricia Hartwell, the woman who'd spent my entire life pointing out my shortcomings, walked over with tears in her eyes and shaking hands. "Sarah," she said quietly, "I owe you an apology that's about 40 years overdue." Her voice was barely above a whisper, but in the silence following Emma's speech, everyone could hear her. "Your father tried to tell me for years that I was being too hard on you, too critical." He'd say, "Patricia, you're going to lose her if you don't stop trying to fix her and start loving her as she is." She looked at Emma, then back at me. "That granddaughter of mine just taught me what I should have learned decades ago. You didn't need fixing, Sarah. You needed supporting, and I failed you as a mother." The conversation that followed was unlike any family gathering we'd ever had. Instead of surface-level pleasantries and passive-aggressive comments, people started sharing real stories. Aunt Linda admitted she'd always admired how I handled my divorce with dignity. Cousin Mark said he'd been inspired by how hard I worked to provide for Emma. Uncle Jim apologized for his earlier comment about real sales and said he respected anyone who showed up to work every day to take care of their family. But the moment that changed everything came when we were packing up to leave. Patricia pulled me aside and said something I'd waited my entire life to hear. "Sarah, I'm proud of you. I'm proud of the woman you became despite having me as a mother, and I'm especially proud of how you raised Emma. She's everything I tried to teach you girls to be. Strong, honest, and loyal. You succeeded where I failed." The drive home was quiet at first. Emma and I were both emotionally drained, processing everything that had happened. Finally, Emma broke the silence. "Mom, are you okay? I know I kind of went off script back there." I pulled over to the side of the road and turned to look at my incredible daughter. "Emma, what you did today was the bravest thing I've ever seen. You stood up for me when I couldn't stand up for myself." "You taught me that, she said simply. "You've been standing up for me my whole life. It was my turn to return the favor." That's when I realized the truth that had been staring me in the face for 16 years. I hadn't failed as a mother or as a daughter or as a person. I'd raised a young woman who knew right from wrong, who had the courage to speak truth even when it was uncomfortable, and who understood that love means protecting the people who matter to you. 3 months later, my relationship with my family is completely different. Rebecca and I talk every week now, real conversations about our struggles and fears, not just surface-level updates. My mother calls not to criticize, but to check in and ask how she can help. We're all learning what it means to be a family that lifts each other up instead of tearing each other down. But the biggest change is in me. I finally see myself through Emma's eyes, not as the family disappointment, but as a woman who survived, who persevered, who raised an extraordinary daughter despite every obstacle thrown in her path. Sometimes the people who love us most can see our strength when we can't see it ourselves. And sometimes, if we're very lucky, they're brave enough to help us find our voice when we need it most. That's my story. The day my daughter taught me to see myself through her eyes instead of through the judgment of people who never really knew me at all. Emma showed me that sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone isn't our approval. It's our belief in their worth, even when they can't see it themselves. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like the family outsider, or if you've had someone in your life who stood up for you when you couldn't stand up for yourself, I'd love to hear about it in the comments below. Share your story. You never know who might need to hear it. And if you believe that family should lift each other up instead of tearing each other down, hit that like button and share this video with someone who needs to remember their own strength today. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more real stories about real families, real struggles, and the moments that change everything, because everyone deserves to know that they're worthy of love, respect, and someone who will fight for them when they can't fight for themselves. Thank you for listening to my story. Remember, you're stronger than you know, and you're worthy of people who see your light, not your flaws.